Hello everyone and welcome to SimpliCode's YouTube channel. Kaushal this side and I hope you guys are doing well. Today we'll be taking you through CSS Grids. CSS Grids is one of the most important topics when it comes to CSS. We use it in almost all of our web pages. You'll get to know why CSS Grids are used. But before we begin, let me tell you guys that we have regular updates on multiple programming videos. So if you are a programmer and if you want to learn something new, then consider getting subscribed to our YouTube channel and press that bell icon to never miss any updates from SimpliCode. So without any further delay, let's get started with CSS Grids. We have been through CSS Flexbox and the display property in the previous two videos. We know why we use CSS Flexbox. Now CSS Flexbox is a one-dimensional property. So the only difference and the main difference between CSS Grid and CSS Flexbox is CSS Flexbox is one-dimensional and CSS Grids is two-dimensional. I'll tell you how to differentiate between CSS Grids and CSS Flexbox. So let me just show you the image. So here we have CSS Flexbox on the left and CSS Grids on the right. You can see Flexbox is one-dimensional because we can either use rows or columns to lay off things on a web page. But in CSS Grids, we can use both of them. We can use rows and we can use columns as well to lay off certain elements on a web page. Fine. So you will get to know more about CSS Grids when we'll move on to the practical part. So let's just get back to the practical part and we'll start with CSS Grids now. So CSS Grid Layout excels at dividing a page into major regions or defining the relationship in terms of size, position, and layer between parts of a control built from HTML primitives. So let me just take you through a basic example of CSS Grids and you guys will understand how CSS Grids is used to lay off multiple HTML elements on a web page. So let's just use a div with classes container. Fine. So we need container like we used container property or we can say a big container for CSS Flexbox. For the same reason we need container property for CSS Grids as well. Every grid item will fall inside a grid container. So there's grid gap as well. So the gap between all the different containers in a grid layout is known as the gap. We'll get to know about it in a moment. So let's just use some items over here. So we are going to use here div class is items and we are going to use another class, let's say. No, just let's use items only. So we are going to write here grid item 1 and we are going to copy this from here, paste it again, okay, 4 times. Fine, so we have, let's say, 4 grids over here. Save it, and here you can see we have 4 grid items. Let's just style them. We are using what we can say CSS file for this now. So we are going to write here dot items is the class name, I guess. Yeah, items is it is. Then we'll write over here background color is aquamarine, height is, let's not use height first, let's use the border property. Border is going to be 1 pixel, solid in nature and black in color. Save it, and here you can see we have 4 grid items. Here you can see if I zoom in, here we have 4 grid items, grid item 1, grid item 2, grid item 3 and grid item 4. So that's it for the grid items. Now we'll move ahead and we are going to use the the class container. So let's just use this property. We are going to write here, okay, before the items dot container, we are going to access the whole container. So there's a container around this box. Let me just show you by using the border. Okay, so we have to use here only the border property. So border is going to be 1 pixel, solid and red in color, let's say. So here you can see this is the grid layout. So you can see all the items have taken almost every inch of the container. Fine. So let me just show you right here display. The display property is used for grid layout as well. Like for the Flexbox we use the display property. We'll use the display property for grid layouts as well. But there's a difference. There are certain properties specifically related to CSS grids that can help us achieve certain layouts. Fine. So we'll write over here grid, save it, and you will see nothing changes over here. The display is grid, but nothing changes because we have to use certain more properties, right? So Like unlike Flexbox, where we have the default, what we can say, flex items, as when we have the default flex items laid out as columns, we don't have any such thing here in CSS Grid. For grids, we have to lay off columns, right? So we'll write over here grid. So here you can see grid template columns. This is the property. Let's just write auto and save it. So here you can see it's not working as of now. So what we are going to do is we are going to write here grid template is, no, we are not going to write here repeat, 100 pixels and 200 pixels. Save it. And here you can see now the grid is, let me just zoom in for you. So here you can see the second and fourth grid items which are on the second column, they have the width of 200 pixels, and the first and third grid item have a width of 100 pixels. So let me just reduce the size of a window back to 100. So here you can see we have 4 grid items. Fine. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write here 100 for the first column and 50 pixels for the second column. Save it. And here you can see the first column is 100 pixels and the second column is 50 pixels. Perfectly fine. We can do the same for rows as well. So if I write here grid template rows, and if I write here 100 pixels for the first column and 50 pixels for the second column again, save it. And here you can see the height of the second row is almost, or we can say exactly half of the first row. So here we have used 100 pixels and here we have the height as 50 pixels. That's also fine. So what we can do, other things we can do is we can use the repeat property. We can write here repeat and we can write here the values. So if we are writing here 100 pixels, or we can say we have to write the column numbers. So we are going to write here 3 and then we are going to write here 100 pixels. Save it. And here you can see we have 3 grid items as which are 100 pixels in width, and the fourth one is on the next line because we have written 3 over here. If we'll write over 2 over here, save it, and here you can see we only have 2 columns. The same goes for 1 as well, save it, and here we have only 1, and the same goes for 4, save it, and here we have all the 4 items in a single row. So because we have used the columns, column number as 4. Fine, same goes for rows as well. So if I remove this and we write here 2, and if we write here repeat, we are going to use 2 and we are going to use 200 pixels for both. So here you can see, okay, and it's not working. Let me just check if there's, okay, we have to remove it from here, save it, and now it's working totally fine. We don't need any space between the repeat. So here you can see we have 2 rows of 200 pixels each. If we are writing here 1, it's the first row which is 200 pixels and the second row is still what, the default size. Fine. So we can use the grid template rows property for these 2 columns as well, or we can say the grid item 3 and grid item 4 separately. What we can do is we can use another class over here. So now the next thing we are going to do is, let me just item 2, item 3 and item 4. Save it, and here you can see nothing seems fine because we have used here the items property, and now we'll change this to item 1 and item 2. Same thing goes for item 3 and item 4. Fine. So we have to write here dot. Okay, it's not working. Let me just save it first. We'll come back here. So we have to do it separately, I guess, for each item. So we can copy it from here and paste it for some more times. We have to just change the item number to 1, 2, 3 and 4. Save it, and here you can see we have all the, what we can say, grids present over here. So now we are going to style every grid item separately. What if I write here the grid column property, and if I write here 2 by 4, just remove this part or just let it be. So here you can see 2 by 4, it starts from 2 and it ends at 4. What does it mean? So the grid column property, it defines from where the grid item, the particular item will start. If I write here grid item, or we can say grid column, and if I write here 1, it will start from the first column, which is the leftmost hand side of the container, and it will go till, let's say if I write here 2, save it, and here you can see it's using 2 grids. If I write here 3, here you can see it takes 3 rows. So if I write here 4, here you can see it takes the whole grid container. Fine. So this is how, let me just show you. If I write here 4, so here you can see it took 4 of them. Fine, from 1 to 4, and the fifth one is grid item 2. So let's just use 2 over here for now. And here you can see we have the grid 1 taken all of a grid container area. The same will do for every, we can do for every grid item. So this is how we can use the CSS grid items property. So if I show you some more properties, and if I write here grid row as 1, save it. So it's taking the first, and I guess I have to remove it from here. The repeat, we are going to use the min max property instead. If I write here 100 pixels and let's say auto, fine, save it. Here you can see it's 100 pixels for the minimum width is going to be 100 pixel, and the maximum height of the row is going to be auto. Fine, it depends on the content within the grid item. Fine. So we can also use the, what we can say, gap property. So the gap, it will define the gaps between all of them. Find all of the grid items. There's a gap we can use. So if I write here gap, and if I write gap as, what we can say, 10 pixels, save it. And here you can see, because we have not used the semicolon over here, here you can see the gap is 10 pixels between each grid item. So let me just remove the container from here, save it, and here you can see the gap is still 10 pixels. Fine, for each container. If I increase the size, here you can see the gap between 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1 and 4 is 10 pixels, and between 2 and 3 and 3 and 4 is also 10 pixels. So I'll just, okay, so we are done with it. Now I guess you guys are aware of the gap property for now. So we can also use the gap property separately for each row and for each column. So if I write here column gap, and if I give it some value like, what we can say, 20 pixels, and let's see if it works. So here you can see the gap increased to 20 pixels, but still the row gap is still 10 pixels. So for that we can use the row gap property, and if I write here 50 pixels, so here you can see the gap is 50 pixels now. So this is how we can use the CSS, the gap property within the grid item or within the grid layout. So the next thing we are going to do is we are going to lay off certain other items as well. So for the second one, we are going to use the grid column property again. So we'll write here grid column 2 by 4. Fine. So we'll write here 2 by 4, save it. And here you can see the grid item 2 is also aligned. Now what we'll do is we'll write over here grid row, the grid row property, and for the second one we are going to write here 1 by 3. Fine. So here you can see the second grid item is here laid off next to grid item 1. Same thing goes for item 3 as well. We are going to use the grid column and grid row property. So we'll write here grid column as 3, and grid row we are also going to define as 3 for the item 3. And for grid item 4 we are going to write here grid column again. Grid column is going to be 2, and grid row is going to be 4. Fine, save it. And here you can see we have all the items laid off in different parts of the web page. Let's add some more what we can say, grid items over here. So we are going to use this, and we are going to paste it here with a change in name, item 5 and item 6. The class name will also change to item 5 and item 6. Save it. There are 2 more items, and we are going to style them now. So we'll use item 4, the class from here, paste it, and what I will do is I'll change the name to item 5, and for item 5 we have the grid column value as 2 and grid row value as 4. Fine. Let's change the values, and I guess there's something which is wrong. So for first column we have used 1 by 4. Let's just use 1 by 3, and here we will use 2 by 4 and 1 by 3. That's fine. For the third item we are going to use 1 and what we can say 2 by 5. Fine. So let's see, now they looks fine. So we want the grid item to be present at the left hand side, which it was not present here. So we are going to use it here now. Let me just see if I have item 4. Yeah, we have item 4. So for item 4 we are going to use grid column as 3 and grid row as 3 again. Fine, save it. So here is our grid item 4, and for grid item 5 we have used 2 and 4. Lastly, we are left with only one grid item, which is item 6. Fine, here we'll use the grid column as 3 and grid row as 4. So here you can see we have all the grids present in their place. So this is the first item. This is the second item, which is a little larger in size than the first. Then we have third, then we have fifth, fourth and sixth. So the middle space is empty. What we did just now is we managed our grids on a web page. We laid off grids at different positions, right? We use the grid column and grid row property for the same. So moving ahead, we'll go through some more properties. Now what we'll do is we'll go through the align content and justify content property. So the justify content property, like we used in the Flexbox, the justify content property is used to align the whole grid inside the container. What does it mean? So let's just remove all the classes from here. Let's say we have only these grids present over here. So I'll mention gap as 10 pixels between each grids, and we are going to use, instead of min max, we are going to use 100 pixels and 100 pixels. Okay, doesn't make any change. So let's just use the auto property here again. Fine. So guys, I guess you guys understood what we did till now. So there's a note for you. The grid's total width has to be less than the container's width. So the container's width has to be more than that of the grid, total width of the grid. Fine. Then only the justify content property will have an effect. So what we'll do is we'll just a second, we'll write over here justify content. Fine. So here you can see what we have is the container class. So for that, what we are going to do is we are going to use the grid container template columns. Let's just give the size by ourselves. So we'll write over here 50 pixels, 50 pixels and 50 pixels. Fine. So here we have 6 grid items. Let's just color them, and for that we can use another class over here, but I'm not doing it for now. I'll use the items class. So we'll write over here item, and just a second, we are going to use the border property. Border is going to be 1 pixel solid and black in color. Then we have the background color. Background color we are going to use aquamarine. Save it. So here we have 6 grids. Fine. Now the container, let me just show you the container as well. Border is going to be 1 pixel solid and blue in color, so that we can distinguish it. So here's the border. Let's give some margin as well. So if I write margin over here, and if I use 5 pixels, okay, so I guess, so we have to use padding. Fine, not margin. Padding is from the inside and margin is from the outside. That's it. So here we have the grid items within the grid container. Now the next thing we are going to do is we are going to write here justify content. So if I write here justify content, and if I say we have different values, if I say space evenly, so here you can see the gap between all the grid items, the column gap is going to be even. Fine. And if I write here space between, save it, and here you can see the first and fourth column are on the left hand side, the third and sixth are on the right hand side, and here you can see the space between them is equal. So here you can see after zooming it. Now we have other values as well for the same. If I write here content, and if you are using VS Code, then okay, so if I write here this justify content, here you can see we have all the properties. We can use space around, space evenly, start, stretch. If I write here stretch, here you can see it stretched, and we have other properties as well for the justify content property. So this property works almost the same as Flexbox, but what we used to do in Flexbox is we used to write here flex start, flex end. We can use here start and end, but we can't use here flex start and flex end. Fine. Say if I write here start, or if I write here end. Fine. So here you can see it was start by default, and for end it starts from the what we can say right hand side. So all the grids move to the right hand side of the grid container. Fine. It looks totally fine now. So let's just use space between, save it, and here you can see we have all the grid items with spaces between them. So we have all the properties over here, center, end, and we write here center. Let's see what happens. So here you can see all the items are present at the center of a grid. And then we have the align content property, which is used to align the content vertically. So for that, what we need to do is we need to use the rows property, grid template rows, and it will work fine if we don't use the grid content grid template row property. So we just have to write here align content at the, let's say, center. So here you can see the content is already aligned at the center. So let me just change the height of this container, then you guys will understand it much better. If I write here 400 pixels, and now you can see the align content property in work. So if I remove it, and here you can see the grid columns, grid rows are stretched because we haven't used the grid template rows property. So if I write here align content at the center, and if I save it, here you can see the content is aligned at the center now. If we use both of them, so if we are going to use the justify content and align content property together, all the content will be present at the center of the whole grid. For now you can see the content is present on the left hand side and in the center of this whole container, which is vertically. And if I write here justify content as well, let's see if it works. So if I write here justify content at the center, save it, and here you can see the content is present at the center. So this is how easy it is to lay off things with the help of CSS grids. We can use CSS grids to use, or we can say to lay off a particular element at the center of our container. It's quite hard to achieve this thing with the help of normal CSS because we have to define certain properties, like we have to define height, margin left, margin right, top, left, and a lot of more properties using CSS. But with using CSS grids, by using CSS grids, we can do it in a simple manner. Fine. So there are multiple properties we can use with CSS grids, like the align items and the justify content, and the align content we just saw by our eyes. And the items property, we can also use the grid column, the grid row, and a lot of properties, right? We can use them according to our convenience. So I hope you guys must have understood what CSS grids are and how we can use them to lay off certain HTML elements on a web page. It's quite easy to use CSS grids. But what do you guys think? Is Flexbox easy, or is CSS grids easy to use? Which one of them you find it easy to use? We have been through both the topics. We covered CSS Flexbox in the previous video. If you guys haven't watched that video, then do give it a try and you will understand CSS grids better. So there's a difference between CSS grids and CSS Flexbox. Not just one dimensional and two dimensional, but there are a lot of differences. We'll cover them in the upcoming videos. So I hope you guys got it what we did in today's video. Like we use CSS grids to lay off certain HTML elements on a web page. So I want you guys to give it a try and let us know in the comments below if you find it difficult or easy to use CSS grids. So that's all for this video, guys. See you in the next one where we'll cover the difference between CSS grids and CSS Flexbox. So if you have if you like this video, then do give it a thumbs up. If you have any doubts, then do let us know in the comments below, and subscribe to SimpliCode's YouTube channel. Thank you.